Welcome to the State of Change Learning Festival. We are powering through day 3. Nice to see you all. I am delighted and I am also humbled to welcome you to this session on signing collaborations for an urgent, courageous change. We developed the State of Change Learning Festival, among other reasons, to explore what the redesign looks like in a post-COVID world. And as everyone probably knows on this call, the world doesn't stand still. And it's not just the post-COVID world we're in now, we are also in a world that's evidently dealing with divided societies and racism and other global issues. So I can't really think of a more timely topic of the one today, and I can't really think of better people and a better organization to help us go through what that might look like in terms of designing collaborations for change with unusual suspects and so on. So we have 2 people from Reboot, Panthea Lee, who's the exec director, and we have Alyssa Krupp, who's the senior program associate. And they're gonna drive us through a bit of a masterclass on their approach and on their work. And I want to emphasize that it is really important for us to hold this learning space, not just as one that can share lessons learned, but also as a space that can hold the vulnerability and the challenges that we all face in these times, and be true to that sentiment throughout both this session and beyond. But with that, on that note, I'll hand it over to Panthea and Alyssa to take us through their work. Really looking forward to it. So thank you and welcome all.
Great. Thanks so much, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. Alyssa and I are based in Brooklyn, in New York, which, as I think many may have seen from the news, is going through a really difficult period right now. We have in the past few days been out protesting with our communities, and we've also during the day been organizing for the type of change that we want to talk about and share with you here today. We were talking just right before the session that it's a pretty surreal time, I think, for the world. 2020 just seems to be the year that just every week is worse than the next. And yet at the same time, we also feel a renewed sense of urgency, and I think also of optimism for the work that we have to do ahead of us. We both live in the Brooklyn neighborhood of Bed-Stuy, where there have been police helicopters circling above our heads for days. And I think sort of folks have seen probably the images of police violence and brutality erupting all over. And so we, I guess, come to you in this session today, perhaps with not all of our thoughts collected, but what we wanted to do was to share with you some of what we're observing in the world from where we sit, share with you some of the past practices and principles and tools that we have used to bring really diverse actors, unlikely partners, often enemies, quote unquote, together, and talk about why we believe this work is really absolutely critical now, and how we are trying to sort of remember what we have learned and remember what we've known, what we do to try and sort of move forward in this moment. And so I invite you all, I think it'd be really great just to start to first get a sense of sort of who is in the room. I see some familiar names, and so it'd be great just to maybe get folks to both type in your location perhaps, but also would just like to do a bit of a check-in as to just one word, one sentence, how everyone's feeling this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're at. determined, overwhelmed, exhausted, concerned, full, yeah, tired, juggling, tired, empathy, thank you, confused, reflective, bewildered, heavy. Yeah, I think there's a lot of tiredness, anger, concern, introspection. Thank you for sharing and thank you for checking in. Really appreciate that. And yeah, I think determined is a good word to remember in this period. We, as a organization, as a team, as a community, have been trying to keep in mind how to be alive and be alive to the world and be in the fight as best as we can be in our professional lives, in our personal lives, in our families, in our communities, and also to try and sort of conserve some of that energy because I think the fights that we have ahead of us in the spaces that we work in are not going to come easy. But I think determined is also a really good feeling to hold on to. So by way of quick introductions, my name is Panthea Lee. I'm the executive director at Reboot, and I'm really happy to be joined by Alyssa, an incredible designer, systems thinker on our team. And, you know, just for those that don't know us, just a little bit of quick background as to who we are. We were started 10 years ago to tackle and challenge structural inequity and injustice, working at the intersection of grassroots organizations and communities, and also in what we think of as the halls of power. We've always sort of made it our business, I guess, to think actively about how to elevate and center the voices of communities that have been historically oppressed and marginalized, and how to make institutions really be able to hear and understand that. And we play I would say, pretty good inside-outside game. We primarily sort of work in these areas that you see here. And I think, yeah, what is unique about our work is we're not usually working with any one set of actors. We're usually finding ourselves in the tug of war and the messiness between all of them. And so just, you know, the conversation that we're having today around how to design collaborations, I think is informed by our work, you know, having done this on issues of standing up new participatory democracy initiatives. We recently stood up a new media lab to support media innovation and independence. We've worked on equity in the global open knowledge movement, and yeah, around the world. And I think our perspective is really informed by our backgrounds as ethnographers first, as organizers, as designers, and as facilitators. What I mean by that is we think deeply about how to understand each stakeholder, but really each human that we're bringing into the circle of any collaborative effort, how to organize and mobilize and build momentum for the ideas we want to see real in the world. We facilitate connections between unlikely actors that don't usually sit together. And as designers, I think we're constantly thinking about how to identify and leverage political windows of opportunity, but also opportunities within systems for change. And so this is the perspective that we're speaking to you from. And I think when we first started developing the session, we actually gave a 3-part series on this, which you can find on our website about a month ago. It was really in response to, as Jesper was saying as well, this COVID moment. We've been inspired by, the next slide, please. We've been inspired by writers and activists calling for imagining a world anew. And we also saw some really promising examples of this in the next slide, you know, where you see these really inspiring global headlines, all with a caveat of being temporary for now, if you read their descriptions. But we really believe that when we come together, we can make these real. And we've been seeing opportunities for this to happen here in New York State. The governor had announced a Reimagine task force to reimagine society post-COVID, to really center equity and justice in efforts, not just to rebuild or go back to, you know, to go back to normal, but to really reimagine what society can be. And we've been inspired in the UK as well. I think this sort of People's Commission on Life After COVID is something we've recently seen rolled out. We've been heartened by these efforts to want to broaden up the conversation, to open up the conversation. And then the past few days happened. So I think, as many of you have seen, here we are today. We have a head of state using tear gas to remove protesters for a photo op. We have seen police violence and brutality erupting nationwide. We've seen it up close, and also, you know, been assaulted ourselves by police officers. And these are the images that we're seeing right now. Across these lines, it feels like it's almost nearly impossible to think about how we can actually come together and bridge these lines, to really collaborate and really think about how it is that we move forward from here. How is it that we imagine us from here? And we've been thinking long and hard about this. But we also know that we do a lot of work with media organizations and journalists, and we all know how the media business models are oriented now. These are also the images that the media wants us to see. They're powerful. They're the ones that get clicks. They're the ones that get shared. But there's also these images. There's an incredible outpouring of solidarity from across society. You are seeing real, and you know, there's been all sorts of criticisms as just why police forces are doing this, but you're also seeing, I think, real outpouring of solidarity and of questioning and of reflection. I encourage you all, if you don't know her, Erica Shields, the chief of police in Atlanta, has been doing an incredible job at, she's long been doing it, but has been doing an incredible job at reaching out to communities affected, really listening with empathy and humility and compassion. And yeah, she's been long trying to set up sort of community collaborations with the Boys and Girls Club of Atlanta, for example, to work with young offenders and support them and their families, because the challenges that we're seeing, are structural and deep and historical, and we need leaders that recognize that. I don't want to dwell too long on the US context, because I know folks are coming from everywhere, but I thought this was helpful to kind of situate some of the most intense and divisive challenges and issues of our time, and in ways that are erupting here in the US, but also we have seen around the world before and will into the future. Something that I think is really amazing right now is, just this morning, I saw this headline. You're seeing these protests now changing hearts and minds. I think as of this morning, this poll, I think it's an Ipsos Reuters poll, saw that about 2/3 of American adults are sympathetic to the protesters and our causes right now. And we have to remind ourselves that this is the same America that has elected Donald Trump, and the same America that helped his approval ratings go up in the early days of COVID. Hearts and minds are now shifting, and policy is also then now shifting. These are from last night and this morning. This is the Speaker of New York City Council just last morning, talking about concrete reforms that we need to make in terms of regulating the police forces. And Jamani Williams, our public advocate, last night, New York is now under curfew in theory. And so after 8 o'clock, when the curfew started, him and many other elected officials in this sort of strong show of solidarity in Times Square, because the other politicians and leaders have not been strong allies, and have actually actively supported the brutality that we're seeing. And I believe that policy follows culture. And I think that these images that we're seeing and these shows of solidarity and these changes that we're going to see are as a result of the wide-scale protest and the brutality that we have seen. And we are now seeing a window of opportunity open for these types of reforms to be real. This is from Campaign Zero, a campaign against police brutality. They put this out, all these, there's evidence-based, research-backed policy reforms that have been long talked about. And now I think we're seeing a window of opportunity where these are in now popular discourse. They are not going to be implemented just because, and they're brilliant campaigners just on campaigning alone. And I think now is the hard work where we have to work for systems change, not just on these issues, but across the board. But this is certainly a deeply political and structural issue here in the US. And so all that to say, I think systems change requires all of us, all of the actors that you see here on this table. Next slide, please. We wouldn't be where we are now with these policy conversations being opened without activists protesting on the streets, without the grassroots groups that have been caring for all the sort of brutalized, tear gassed, beaten protesters, and without, journalists. There's different opinions on how the media is covering this, but journalists calling attention to it, and then governments sort of heeding our calls. And at the same time, and actually I would be curious, just as we're looking at this, I'd be curious just to maybe run the poll to see which part of the system folks that are with us here identify with. I recognize you may identify with more than one. I certainly do. But we just love to get a sense of the room.
We had a bit of trouble with the poll, so could people write in the chat which of these categories people feel they're part of? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's really exciting, I think, to see the diversity in the room here, and yeah, I think system change requires all of us. And yes, I do believe lawyers fit in somewhere here as well. Apologies for not having lawyers at the top of our as a top line heading. I think that we know system change requires all of us. And at the same time, next slide, please. We also believe that to make systems change, we also need to extend our own roles and extend beyond what we traditionally and archetypally, I guess, think of as the role that we play. I think most folks here, I see a lot of hyphens, a lot of folks that wear multiple hats. And I think that this is essential if we're going to go forward and do this work, because the archetypal roles of protesting is not enough. How might activists help define hats to dismantling the injustice that we're protesting? Government is, the role is to sort of set and deliver policies, but also we need to protect against corruption. And I think that journalists are now sort of monitoring institutions and, covering the protests as they should, but the type of going to media models, the type of divisiveness and hate that the media is also fueling is not productive in this time. And so we know we need to extend beyond ourselves, and we know we need to sort of work with one another across these divides, because if activists say, okay, great, we did our bit, we got this in the national conversation, now it's over to government, and we're handing off the baton. I guess I don't have trust in government alone to be able to carry forward the reforms that we need to see. I don't trust I do trust researchers. I don't trust that if researchers were just to hand off, that we would be able to see the scale and the effectiveness of the solutions that we need. And yet people say, we want to collaborate. Next slide, please. We want to collaborate, but these are all the problems. And I think this is a theme that has come up in the last few days as well, in the other sessions. How do we really bring folks to the table? How do we agree on a common vision? We all think about it really differently. How do we really sustain the momentum when we're all exhausted and confused and tired and overwhelmed? How do we keep up that determination? And yes, you know, radical collaboration is really, really difficult. These are the issues that we see time and again across all of our work, and that we're especially seeing right now. You know, there is a huge amount of mistrust between the folks that we are trying to organize and communities we're trying to work across. There is, I think, for many of our government allies right now, a fair bit of shame that we are hearing in the conversations that we're in. People feel helpless and unable to fulfill the functions that they think they are supposed to. And so there's a fear then that we're going to get found out if we open this up to invite activists to sit at the table, to invite researchers to come. They're going to exploit our vulnerabilities, tell people that we don't know. And so in some ways, inertia feels safer. Yes, this is a good idea. Let's schedule another Zoom call next week. Let's update that concept note next week. Let's wait for the right opportunity until the dust has settled. I'm hearing a fair bit of let's wait until the dust is settled. And that's just not good enough. We don't have time to wait until the dust settles because people are getting killed and beaten. And we know we need to move faster, and we need to overcome mistrust and shame and fear. And so that's a little bit what we're going to be talking about today, because we think that this type of collaboration is absolutely essential. We need the superpowers of every single one of these actors in different sequences at different times, and with varying levels of intensity, but we need all of these at the table to be able to move forward. And while some tell us it's utopian, we have done it before, and we will all do it again, because we know the societies that we live within that are unjust and unequal were intentionally designed. And we think that the path to liberation can also be designed. And so with that, thank you for listening to some of our reflections from the last few days. And we want to now talk about how to set up the very early stages to be able to overcome the historical antagonisms and fears that we talk about, and set these coalitions up for success. Just a note, this was a 3-part series that we're condensing into one, and so we're not going to go through the entire arc of what we're sharing with you, but we do have resources available also on our website if you'd like to take a look at them for the later stages. But we thought the early bit was the most important to focus on right now. So with that, I will pass over to Alyssa.
Hi everyone, Alyssa here from Brooklyn as well. I'm glad to see you all here in the chat. I encourage you, if you have questions or comments, to drop them in while we're talking, and we do have activities set up for during pieces of this. So as Panthea mentioned, collaborations can be extremely difficult, particularly when we're trying to work across sectors and silos, but we know that they can be successful and built in ways that uplift and inspire creative and successful work. So at Reboot, we see building these collaborations as an art as well as an arc. We call this arc the art of alignment. We use this to describe the process of bringing together many partners and stakeholders over the course of collaboration. So as Panthea mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the initial piece of this arc. The first 3 you can see in this box here. The final 2 are explained in our masterclass, which you can find online if it's of interest. So to get started, let's talk about the work we do before the work. So the work we do before the work is something we consider before you meet, before you bring people together. It is the work you do initially in your group or as an individual, depending on your context, and you're laying the foundations for a strong collaboration. So it requires thinking about what you want to address or solve or change, and who is well positioned to help you. So bringing people together can be really difficult, and this pre-work will help lay the foundation for understanding where you're coming from, where they're coming from, and how you can plan to do so. So before we start anything, we first have to acknowledge our biases and probe into them on the individual and institutional level. We all have them based on our own experiences, context, influences, and networks. These are the things that shape what we include or exclude, and what we consider and who we invite to these collaborations typically. So these biases can prevent us from seeing other potentially more impactful ideas and approaches. So it's really vital that we take the time to sit down and think about what these can be. So as we keep this in mind, we think about who are the right humans to engage. So identifying the right humans means not the right organizations, it means the right individual. So thinking about not necessarily who the biggest name is, but leaning into those trusted relationships that we've grown through our work, and thinking carefully about who participates and how they do so. So this is really important in collaborations. The different types of skills, expertise, and affiliations, individual characteristics and temperaments can really shape and change how collaborations work, especially during times of crisis or uncertainty. So we really want to make sure that differently suited people and different experiences are brought in together. So at Reboot, we view this as more of a curation. So we try to identify participants based on our objectives. So we encourage you to think about that as well. What is the goal of your collaboration and who will help you get there? And now when we're thinking about the right humans, there are specific profiles or buckets, as we can call them, that we consider and encourage you to consider as well when working to set this up. And we really focus on having a diverse group of these people. So the ones that typically come to mind for most of us, I think, are experts, decision makers or leadership, and allies. So funders, media, academia, those who can help us draw on other models or examples. But it's really important, and we want to call attention to some of the others that are often overlooked. The first are living experts. These are those who have had actual direct lived experiences of the challenges you're looking to explore or to solve. They can be citizens who live in an affected area or those who have tried to use a service. And we typically have such a narrow view of expert, but we have to recognize that the people that are living these experiences are who and we are solving for and who we want to solve with. And they really can help us understand the problem or context in such a deeper level. The other group of people are implementers. And these are those we often overlook and sometimes can be ourselves. They're involved in executing and conducting the day-to-day work. They are critical to the real life execution of our projects, of our work, our services that we create. And we want to make sure that they are involved in the design of this process or processes, because they really help us ensure that what we developed can be used in practice, can be used in the institutional context, that will be picked up and not just left on the table. So when we think about curating a mix of perspectives, a mix of people in the room, we have a couple tips here in this makeshift bar chart with technical experts showing that, sometimes less is more. They have such great expertise, but having many of them in the room can overshadow some of the other people. Living experts, we encourage you to think that you should bring in more than you originally think, and think of these living experts as differently than you might have in the past. With the decision makers, it's really important to involve them early. You want to have them help set the guidelines that you'll use, but you don't want to get into the weeds and have them be nitpicking on certain aspects. So being very particular about where you bring these leaders in. For implementers, we always encourage you to bring in far more than you think every time. They are going to be the ones who give you the details, the nuance of your projects. And then allies, we encourage to bring in at strategic points. So where can they best suit the work you're doing? How can they help you collaborate in larger ways that break silos? And overall, when you're doing this pre-work, the work before the work, we really encourage you to actually talk more than you probably are doing. So this means understanding where your potential collaborators, those humans that you're thinking of bringing to be involved, are coming from. So this can be done through surveys or interviews, talking on the phone, and really getting into what is their experience, what are they interested, what priorities do they have, so you have that knowledge ahead of time so you can plan accordingly. You also want to make sure that you're introducing experiences that are not in the room. This can be done through living experts, but can also be done, and is important to bring out the perspectives of those who may not be able to be present. And then finally, the pre-work is not just for you, it is for those future collaborators. And we really encourage you to think about sharing what you've learned and bringing others up to speed. So this can be creating new materials to share ahead of time before you meet anyone in person. So with these quick tips in mind, we're going to do an activity. We're going to do a stakeholder map. We're gonna take 5 minutes. I encourage you to grab pen and paper, a stack of Post-its, whatever you have on hand, and draw these 3 circles. We're going to be using them to base our brainstorming. So I'm gonna explain it and then we'll give you time. So the first circle, the inner circle, is for those who are internal stakeholders, for those who are closest to you. So as you're thinking and brainstorming and putting people in the center circle, who do you have easy access to? The second rim or second circle are for those you have a direct line to. So maybe you don't know them personally, but you know of them, you have a friend who knows them as well. They're kind of within reach if you emailed them, that sort of work. And then the third are the indirect stakeholders, or those who are more distant from you. This can include people like the public or the users of a service, those who might seem out of reach. So we're going to use this circle map as a way to kind of place where they are according to your work. And so as you write these people down, I would encourage you to consider the various types of stakeholders we mentioned. So I've listed them here, technical, living experts, decision makers. And as you're writing them and as you're organizing on your circle, do you have more than type than another? So for now, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to work on this map. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the chat as we go or verbally. So a question around what you're making the stakeholder map about. This can be for any type of collaboration that you want to create that you might not have before or that you're thinking about doing. So if you are looking to create a collaboration for your work, you can use that as your context. If you're looking to create a collaboration in a more activist, community-based way, you can focus it in that way. It's whatever you're currently thinking about collaborating on now. So yeah, for these breakout rooms, I think a helpful question will be thinking about what the most challenging aspects of bringing together these diverse actors will be, and then highlighting where you saw any gaps in your map.
I mean, I think that, you know, I think something that our breakout was talking about was a little bit around, you know, just going to Alyssa's point, I think we so often reach for the biggest titles, the most prominent organizations, the biggest names, because those are, you know, what we traditionally think of the right actors to bring in together, but how those can actually be often really problematic because they're coming with their own agendas and their own priorities and that are far less malleable and flexible than folks that may be a little bit sort of under the radar. I think Julian made a really good point around, you know, really wanting to start in the circle and identify folks that are values-based and then sort of build up and out from there. So, yeah. Does anyone want to talk about sort of Alyssa or others, or we can move on to the, okay. So I think the next stage, yeah, sort of in interest of time, we'll sort of continue moving, but we can also take questions and discussion in our sort of last half hour as well. So the second stage of this, once we've sort of identified the right humans, then I think, and sort of figured out the right ratio of actors and mixes that you want in the room. And I think this is always, by the way, a very iterative exercise, even just as our, you know, political situation is changing here in the US, the allies that we're reaching out to and extending an invitation to is starting to change as well. And yeah, I think sort of really great point from Brian here. I think often early on you want to bring in, you really want sort of folks that can actually bridge across different stakeholders and speak lots of different languages that aren't just yeah, that, you know, kind of the facilitators that, again, we think a lot about sort of inside outside game and how to sort of bridge those people that are sort of comfortable moving between these and helping folks find commonality. Keeping higher level decision makers involved enough. I think oftentimes for us, it's getting their sort of sign off and buy-in early on, and keeping sort of not giving them too many details at the outset. And especially right now, we're also taking advantage of some of the political pressure that folks are feeling to sort of sign on to something, but then also asking, and yeah, an example would be helpful, asking them to then sort of assign folks that are, again, the implementers that Alyssa was mentioning. We always want to be working with implementers, people that know the ins and outs of policy, people know that the ins and outs of different protocol at agencies and guidance and whatnot, because those, like a lot of the change that actually needs to happen is in the weeds. And so those are the people that generally we want to bring in, and then it's setting up regular checks with sort of our politicals and decision makers. So just sort of moving on into this sort of diagram, and today we are really only going to get to grounding through commonalities, but the second stage is really, really critical. It's how we think about building that sense of community between people that sometimes don't like each other, actually, you know, really oppose each other in their views, and how do we sort of get them to come together and talk about the elephants in the room. This stage, I think, is really, these next two stages are really critical for building this momentum once you get started. So next slide, please. The way that we think about this is, it is so important to have everybody meet as humans first. What we see in long-term change exercise that we're involved in is, we know it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging. We are going to challenge one another. And so step zero is always how to build a sense of community, how to build a sense of camaraderie before tackling the substance, before tackling the technical issue. Oftentimes we get pushback from people that, you know, from communities, from folks that are engaging us to say, we just want to get into the work. We just want to get into the technical work. We don't have any time to waste. We just need to get into it now. What are the solutions? And we always push back and say, spending this time to get to know each other will pay off in terms of the solutions. It will pay off technically, because we need to, because we need to reconnect with who we are, why we're in this fight, and help shed away sort of the titles and the affiliations and the opposition that we've seen from, you know, these unlikely partners that we're bringing to the table together. And so how we usually try and do this is we try and get people to get in touch with what really matters to them before all of these, you know, titles and affiliations and whatnot. And this is usually done through, we usually do it through storytelling or other, you know, prompts and methods. And so some sample ones, you know, what is the first memory you have of injustice in X or Y issue? Or when did you first realize that this is what you wanted to dedicate your life to, or this is what you wanted to work on? And this is so important, because by getting people to tell stories, that is not about, tell me about your professional accomplishments, tell me about, you know, what's the greatest last thing that you've done, and really getting people to tap into a memory and a story. It is so much harder, I think. I mean, there's folks that are very good at sort of posturing around this, but it is just harder to front, I guess, and to, you know, talk about the specific solutions that you have in mind. And I think it's a way of disarming people and of getting people to sort of meet first. Next slide, please. We've stuck. So James, I don't think I totally understand your question, so maybe if you could, I'll try and answer it. So that's the first, and we usually spend a good amount of time in the first initial meetings on this, you know, and sometimes that's breaking bread, that's going out for dinners together, that's just spending time getting to know one another. But a second thing that's really, really important at the outset too is really getting ahead of the elephants in the room as a convener and as a facilitator, and doing it in as respectful a way as possible. Often I think about the role of facilitation, and, you know, I think sometimes we say facilitator and we add neutral at the beginning, neutral facilitators. I think good facilitators are not neutral. I think facilitators need to be values-based, and they need to be able to hear the needs and desires and frustrations and aspirations of everyone in the room, but they don't need to be neutral. We need to be able to hold the ground on which these debates can unfold, and it is okay to take points of view at times. And I think it's important to then name the tensions that exist amongst this group of collaborators that you are bringing together, because you have to show that it is normal and it is expected to talk about these things at whatever collaboration for setting that you're bringing together, because otherwise they will manifest in different ways. People will start forming sort of other factions, parallel processes aside, they will disengage. And you want to, as a convener, get out in front of this and name these tensions, which you will know exactly. You should know exactly what they are if you've done what Alyssa, you know, referred to as the work before the work. You should know what those landmines are going to be. You should know what those pressure points are going to be, and you want to find a way to sort of talk out of them in a more depersonalized way, because, you know, oftentimes what we see is people actually want to point fingers and want to say, it is you, it is this thing, it is this past thing you did. Here, I have the research. Let me tell you. And so some of the ways that we do this is we give sort of different prompts or tools, and sometimes it's, you know, trying to lighten the mood as much as possible, and I mean, de-escalate, such a weird term these days, but yet reduce the pressure somewhat. And so, you know, we've had, what was your last oh shit moment? What was that? You know, talk to us about that, because that often shows, okay, there is this, you know, right now I've been talking with police officers, there's this thing that they have to do for their jobs, and this is who they are as a human, and there's a big gulf between that. Things like that help give people the permission to say, this is the delta that I see. Or the worst memory I have of trying to do this work is X, Y, and Z. Or do you agree or disagree with X controversial statement that you want to put into the room? And so just on that last point, I want to give an example, and here's the statement. So usually what we end up doing is, let's say in a session, we might, or if you're in a physical room together, we get people to line up along a spectrum around whether or not they strongly agree to strongly disagree with the statement. And they'll sort of line up there, and that requires everyone to take a stand and think carefully about where they stand. it allows it makes everyone an active participant from the get-go, and it introduces some of the controversy that is present and probably palpable in the room, maybe not just named yet. And so this is one right now that we are, thinking about and using. So is the poll function working or no? I know we were trying to set it up, but it may not have worked.
No, no luck, I'm afraid, Panthea.
Okay, no,
Sorry,
that's
mate.
fine. No, that was on us. I think we tried to do it too late. So I would love just maybe for everyone in the chat to perhaps say, so if you think 5 is strongly agree, 1 is strongly disagree, and then, anywhere in the middle there, actually 1 to 10, just let's add some more nuance. 1 to 10, 10 is strongly agree, 1 is strongly disagree. I'd love just to get a quick sort of temperature of the room in terms of where you are in this statement. I believe that structural change is only possible through mass popular uprising. Interesting. Excellent. Thank you to those that are participating. So something like this for us, and well, actually, and I would be curious if anyone would like to, I don't know if actually it's possible with the muting, but if anyone would like to just share quickly their number, I guess, their views and why they are where they are. No obligation, but just wanted to offer this, the opportunity. Okay. I think what's really useful, and if you would like to just, maybe put in the chat and we can unmute you. Historical lessons give a few hints, and Naomi, you were sort of on the 7-8 end of the spectrum. Others feel free to sort of chat in, but basically usually how we, and we usually sort of run groups through a set of these and other exercises sort of at the very beginning, just to get people to open up, to express where it is that they're coming from, and be able to see others that perhaps are wearing a different hat from them, are from a different sort of part of the system, but actually think similarly to them for different reasons. It allows us to get it out. And we also encourage people, we've had some really robust and helpful conversations using this mechanism to help people, just identify each other and be able to get into the issues quickly and talk a lot about the why of what it is that they are, a lot about the why of where it is that they're coming from. And so we find sort of exercises like this just a soft way to name the tension before you get into the hard work of then unpacking why and how and whose fault. Hopefully you're not getting to whose fault too early, but it's a way to sort of depersonalize but get into it. And so all that to say, once you're sort of meeting for the first time, we just, it's absolutely imperative to meet as human beings and to talk about some of these really hard, messy issues. And I encourage you to not avoid it, but actually to lean into it and to create the space in the room for that. And with that, Alyssa, do you want to move us to the next stage for today?
Sure. So I'm mindful of time and I will try and walk through this quite quickly, but there is a lot in this section. So if you do have questions or want any more information on what we're going through when grounding commonalities, do stick around for the Q&A. I just want to make sure that we leave time for that. So in the third part of our arc that we're going to be talking about today is when you're building the momentum, you have the people in the room, you've done the work before the work, and you've kind of started to address these tensions, the opportunities for people to engage and be seen as humans. And so as we come together, we really want to think about framing our rallying cry or coming together to make our call to action. And so we can ground it in either the problem space or the solution space. And this is typically a spectrum, but we're going to separate it into the 2 areas to make it easier to talk about. So the first, the problem space, is when we have identified a messy, complex social problem, but aren't quite sure how to best address it together. So while we understand the problem, the solution is still completely undefined. Whereas the solution space is where we understand the problem and have already identified the solution or approach. So if we start in the problem space, there's an example here for you to look at. We can ground our framing around this problem. So this example is the case and problem is that the public service providers do not have the capacity or resources to do their work. And this framing concisely introduces the problem and tells us who specifically is affected. And it appeals to a wider variety of people because it doesn't alienate anyone in its language. And while we do pinpoint a specific problem in this example and a specific stakeholder, we don't point fingers or don't blame them. We empathize and recognize where they are coming from and leave opportunities for them to engage. If we start from the solution space, we've already identified the solution and our problem, and we're thinking about co-creating or adapting it. So in this example, we've identified mutual aid groups are stepping up and that we need to create a central dashboard. So by doing this, the framing tells us exactly what the problem is and how to solve it. It doesn't allow for the nuance that can come from experiences in the room. And it means that when we're bringing in our collaborators, they have a solution presented to them. They don't have, or necessarily might not feel, the opportunity to put in their ideas or their experiences. So when we're entering into these new transformative collaborations, we really do want to think about starting in the problem space. So taking our ideas or the solutions we might have and kind of holding them back and presenting the problems and ideas we might have more as hunches. So thinking about, thinking about a wider range of possibilities. How can we include the skills of others in the room? How can we use them to bolster our problem space, to give more nuance and meaning to that area? It does not mean that we don't have ideas on how to best address it, but it does mean that we're recognizing that the importance of considering this wider range of possibilities. And we can do this by continuing to invite those diverse voices and not bringing in that predetermined solution. And so how do we do that? We give them something they can see themselves in. So we all have good ideas. Everyone comes in with something that they're excited or passionate about. I know when I come into doing design work or coming into brainstorming work that I usually have an idea and I'm quite excited to talk about it. But it's important to be able to hold that back and to be able to listen as much as you contribute. I think this is human nature. Everyone has their own perspectives and incentives that they bring with them, but acknowledging that their giving space is really important in this work will help build that collaboration. We also can't do everything and need to make decisions. So we try to focus in and tackle aspects that can be urgent and important and focus on ideas and important clues from people that signal what matters to them. So this can be including elements or features that are critical to success or any personal needs that they might flag. So we have an example. Kind of staying in the COVID-19 theme, this is about hearing what they say. So we want to make sure that we're hearing each actor. So we have medical responder, activist, nonprofit staff, and city council member in our collaboration. So the medical first responder is saying that they want something that's fast, that they are looking to rapidly respond to community needs. Whereas a nonprofit staff are maybe looking to focus on the most vulnerable first, that they feel it's important to consider and focus the efforts on meeting those needs of often overlooked communities. So as we're listening to this and we're looking around our collaboration, we can kind of start to determine what success criteria for the group might look like. And so we try to redefine or reframe what they're saying in a way that we can use to measure the success of our group. So if we're looking at a medical first responder who is saying fast, we might think for them to feel like they've been heard, that they want something that's urgent, that they have such a stake in the ground that they really want something that's rapid. Whereas the nonprofit staff might be saying they want to focus on the most vulnerable, but they're really talking about centering equity and justice. And so by reframing some of these ideas into success criteria, we can bring these forward into creating our call to action or a rallying cry. So we have an example of a rallying cry that we're telling you to avoid. This example is quite broad and generalized to start. It doesn't specify the problem. It presents a solution rather than inviting others to input on the problem. And in this case, it may go beyond what collaborators are able to do. And so it's really important to think about, as you're creating these rallying cries, to invite that collaboration. And so to do that, we go back to this table that we just had, thinking about, okay, they're talking about fast, most vulnerable, survival and recovery. We've rephrased it into success criteria. How can we make sure that this criteria is integrated into our call to action? And so as we rewrite it, we make sure to include those success criteria into this work. So we have a specific group or beneficiaries at the top that we'd like to work and support. It identifies a clear problem and starts to integrate the wording that we've heard from this group and collaboration directly into this response so that they feel like they are personally invested into this. And this is one of the ways in which you can start to gather and ground through the commonalities in one notion, in one output. And so in the end, you really want to give people a reason to show up. It can be quite hard to get many actors in different silos, different departments, different sectors to come into this collaboration. And some of the ways we suggest you can do that is by being really precise in your interests and concerns. We try to avoid jargon because it can be alienating for those who aren't familiar with the many acronyms that happen in many fields. As Panthea was mentioning, it's really key to try and think about avoiding blame. We really want to be empathetic and bring in those voices to make a stronger solution and collaboration. And we want to spark imagination. As designers, as practitioners, it's really important to get people to think out of their normal box while bringing that experience that they have with them. And so thinking about what if rather than what about or what not. And so by asking them to think big, we're placing them in an opportunity to stretch both backwards into their role and forwards towards a greater collaboration. I know I went through that quite fast, but hopefully we can talk about that in the Q&A. So Panthea, back to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. And so I think that, where we sort of got to today and where we wanted to start was really around these first parts of the arc of alignment. I think that folks, we find, often want to start with, here is, I think we were talking about in the chat just now, here is my idea, do you want to join me in doing it? And right now, particularly, everyone is overwhelmed and having a difficult time. And if you need, so if you really want to and believe in the superpowers and the unique value that each actor has to bring, we really encourage you to, find the right folks, build this community momentum, ground before you get to basically sort of this messy part here. I think so many folks end up starting from the messy part of then what are the solutions going to be? And if you haven't done this work, that just ends up being a little disastrous. And so, just next slide. We really think of this as a journey. And it's important to plan the arc. I think the collaboration is messy. You're coordinating a lot of humans and a lot of institutional priorities and a lot of mandates and resources and whatnot. And so think about how do you actually sort of build that community and momentum first, get people familiar with one another, and do it fast in the era that we're in now before tackling the technical challenge. Thinking about the multiple touch points that you have to plan for. Many of the issues that we're working on, as you all very well know, are not going to be solved in one meeting or one conference or one forum or whatnot. And so how do you think about perhaps more tighter, more frequent touch points early on as you're trying to sort of get momentum building. And then over time, think about more regular and more spread out. I think sometimes folks quickly default to things like weekly meetings or monthly meetings or quarterly, and those may not be fit for purpose. So really think carefully about what you're trying to accomplish with each touch point and plan accordingly. And then I think finally, it's just usually we're playing the role of convener and facilitator, but we often and from the outset are always thinking about who do we want to bring in early that can eventually sort of lead and grow this over time. We start with the handoff plan in mind because we're not the ones holding the mandate. And so we think about how to grow a group's leadership. Who are the allies and actors we want to get in? And I think Lisa, or perhaps in the chat, was thinking about how might roles shift over time. You do want to define those roles carefully, but you always want to make sure that you have room to negotiate them where possible. So strategically vague scopes of works or MOUs or whatnot are really helpful because you want to see who in your coalition is actually interested in and capable of working in this way. So that is just a really high level and quick outline of sort of the beginning of building these coalitions for change. Again, more resources are on our website if you like. From the sort of last two touch points, which are actually quite technical, but we just wanted to sort of give a preview here. And with that, we can move on to questions. Oh, and yes, this is some of the work that we're doing. Reach out if you have any ideas. So happy to take questions.
Gunter's got a question in the chat, which I imagine many people feel when there's no time. How do you do a process that feels like it might take a long time?
Yeah. I think what we ideally like is, to be able to give ourselves the time and the space to do this. But I think this process flexes up or down. I think right now we are rapidly in multiple calls a day and sort of trying to move things on very urgently to be able to respond to this current moment. But we're sort of still keeping in mind, okay, we're getting introduced to pretty senior officials within government, and we're trying to sort of find soft ways of trying to break through the beyond the title. Where is it that they're coming from? And so some of this is just usual stuff like deep research into who your counterparts are, where they're coming from, trying to be a bit disarming by finding a piece of sort of personal history from sort of way back, and just trying to sort of integrate these elements into these chats that I think people don't usually. Officials are usually sort of lobbied and petitioned and sort of don't usually get a chance to sort of connect on that. So even on a 1 hour call, we might just spend, kind of 10 minutes talking at the beginning about where it is that we're coming from with this, what our personal experiences have been over the past, few days and months, and just trying to find a way to sort of do that. And we're just going in sort of rapid cycles. We're not doing everything perfectly right now. We're letting sort of fast be better than perfect. And so I think there is, but I think you have to take those calls around sort of what you can sacrifice and what you can't. But I think connecting as humans is the thing that we would not sacrifice because we have to start with from a place of trust. Alyssa, jump in on any of this as well.
Sure. I saw a question from a design student. I was also a design student, so I understand the want and need to have many experts give in info on your projects. And I think as we were talking, the role of expert is different. So as you're talking to scientists, they have so much knowledge and so much expertise in their field. But if you're looking to, I don't know what kind of design student you are, if you're a product designer, you really want to also value the expertise of those you're designing for. Who will your future users be? Who can you talk to that might not have the same opinion as someone who's, a researcher, because they're living with it every day. They are the actual experts. If you're designing for a diabetic, for example, they're going to know the ins and outs of, an insulin pump more so than someone who's researched diabetes. And so the expertise is important. It's just about balancing what that might look like and making sure there's room for everyone to input into your projects.
Great, thanks. Ruben also had a question around how to move from solution-centric framing to a problem-centric one, and then to a value-centered one. I think that, I mean, I think right now a lot of what I'm seeing in my inbox is around, you know, these are the solutions that we need. Sign a petition or sign on to my thing, and everyone's just kind of overwhelmed by trying to decide, okay, should I donate my money here or here? Should I jump in with this coalition or that one? Should I sign on with this, you know? And I think that is problematic. Everyone's overwhelmed, and we don't have space to sort of process all what these different solutions are. And so I think, you know, Alyssa's point around sort of crafting a rallying cry that people can see themselves in is really important now. You want to spend your time on something that you think you can help shape, and you can help meaningfully shape, and you can sort of integrate your values into here. And so I think some of the sort of values part is a little bit hearing what these different groups are calling for, and then bringing that into whatever rallying cry that you're using. The later bits, when we have sort of the brainstorming and the, you know, the later part, once you're getting to solutions, I think it's absolutely critical to then codify these values that you are articulating and integrate them into your sort of brainstorming process, your collaboration process in very concrete ways. And so, you know, again, more on our website, but I think sort of very concrete ways to do that include thinking about how do you translate them into specific design criteria that then you're assessing solutions against. So, you know, for design folks, you'd be familiar with sort of, you know, 2x2 matrices or decision matrices or other things like that, where you can sort of help a group actually codify their values and then work through step by step different solutions. Because I think one of the challenges in coalitions is people feel there's kind of this assumption that when we're collaborating, we need to come to consensus on something. And I think consensus is really dangerous. Consensus usually ends up meaning that you end up having a diluted lowest common denominator solution where everyone gets like a little bit of their thing in there and doesn't particularly have a point of view. It's probably somewhat incoherent, but everyone goes back to say to their organization, their boss, whatnot, I like, you know, got our thing. And so I think it's really important to then translate those values into ways of assessing solutions, ways of assessing initiatives that everyone can see, and transparently, this is how the group came to the decisions it did, even though not each actor will actually agree. So I hope that speaks to your question, Ruben, but let me know if not. Is compromise a dirty word? I mean, I think we all need to compromise somewhat, but I don't know. I feel like you know, having like values-based, transparent decision making, then people like are compromising from a place of like understanding the logic of where it's coming from, rather than okay, I think usually compromise is seen as I'm going to give a little bit of what I want to let you have a bit of what you want. And it's seen from like a political stance rather than a how does this actually advance what we all agreed that we were coming together to do. It's getting quite dark in here. Alyssa, do you want to take the next one?
Sure.
You have a lot of experience with this.
With the ownership one?
Yeah. And the flows and the change of stakeholders.
Yeah, so how do you establish and maintain ownership after a collaborative endeavor? People often move on, flow through different positions, etc. So I think at Reboot, we've seen this happen quite a bit, both with teams we're working with, on our own team. You know, people have, you know, new ambitions. They've been with us for a long time. And I think what's important is to create opportunities for cohesion in the group. So if you have a collaboration and you have a certain way of working, a certain filing system, this is really boring, but a certain filing system, a certain way that you manage how you communicate with each other, it can be easier to share that power. So people know how to help themselves. And I think that is really important as we think about large collaborations in particular, because there are often times when, you know, there are different people who are busy. They are distracted by, if this collaboration isn't their main job, they might be doing their main job and other collaborations as well. And so thinking about giving power to the people to find what they need. And then as you have ownership, I think thinking about what that really means. Is there one person who's in charge? Sometimes there is, and that's totally fine. But oftentimes there are situations where power is shared and you have a group of people, particularly with mutual aid groups. I'm thinking about that because I'm in one now here in Bed-Stuy, and there's opportunities for people to lift up what they want and get input from the group themselves. So I think there are a lot of different mechanisms that might take too long to explain here, but thinking about, you know, what might works best for collaboration from the start and deciding together what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also another really important point too, I think that was spot on. Another important point too is like, when you start from a human perspective of where these folks are coming from, and trying to really understand people's values, whatnot, if you picked your collaborators right, and, you know, usually people move on to other organizations and roles that are still aligned with your agenda somewhat. And so that is a way to also then get champions in new places as well. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. So don't focus just on the organization, focus on the human, because, you know, if you got the right humans, they're going to continue, you know, bringing value back to the set of things you're doing.
Exactly.
And I think to Jesper's question as well, yeah, I think that, I think we are inherently talking about enabling shifts in power, reclaiming political agency and power in different ways. And I think, you know, all of us as conveners, as facilitators, as people that stand up and run these things. And I think this is the other point about, like, I think neutral facilitation is BS, you know, you basically, because I think the people that are commissioning this, they have incentives to allow certain voices to be a part of it and certain voices to not. I think that many times when we get sort of brought in to do something, you kind of look at the attendee list and it's diverse in a very sort of narrow definition of diverse. It is the executive directors or the CEOs of a certain set of groups. It is, you know, whether it might not be race diverse, it might not be geographically diverse, it might, you know, and so I think that, you know, I think it's incumbent upon all of us, and I think we have some choices to make around how we push back to within the institutions that we're embedded in or that we work in, and how do we really elevate and center the voices for us of communities that have been historically oppressed and marginalized, which is also to not say that they should always be in the same room with people at the same time. I think that there's also I think sometimes people try and overcompensate in weird ways. Well, I want to bring, you know, kind of the poor person, the person of color. I want to bring, you know, into this to then talk about their issues and trauma, to educate me so then I can understand. And, you know, yeah, we all have a lot of listening to do. We all have a lot of learning to do, but what is the best way of integrating those perspectives? Alyssa was talking about sort of living experts in ways that are respectful and in ways that are constructive. And some of that then requires you as a convener, you know, to do the work before, to bring in those perspectives, those testimonials in ways that may make sense. Whether it is through video testimony, whether it's, you know, we're ethnographers and designers, so sort of bring those in sort of design artifacts. And also whether that is, right now we're doing sort of a lot of work thinking about the role of public art in these, to be able to, again, sort of help people elevate voices in ways that are public and large and beautiful and inspiring, rather than, you know, talk about sort of just marginalized communities, because that's a shitty way to be referred to time and again.
Great.
I know we are at time. Should we another answer, or should we stop? Or?
No, I think I might have to jump in.
Please.
Thank you, Alyssa Panthea, for this rigorous introduction to your approach, and also along all the reflections and insights along the way. I certainly found that hugely inspiring and useful. Yeah, and thanks for everyone for participating as well in all the questions and engagement. It's been, yeah, it's been a delight. And on the sort of humble note, I wish you, I know this is an emerging practice and it's certainly emerging issues that we're dealing with. So I wish you all the best in pursuing those and taking good care of yourselves in the process. But for now, thanks for this space and this time.
Great.
We'll see you next, in the next sessions.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for having us, and see everybody in the coming sessions. It's such an exciting program, and we're so happy to be a part of this. So thank you.